Welcome to today's edition of Colors of Life. When we become Christians, do all our problems fly away and we live happily ever after? There's a school of thoughts that thinks that way. But my guest today believes that even when we live with adversity, the grace of God is more than sufficient for us. Her name is Toyin Adesola, and she was born with sickle cell, a condition affecting the red blood cells. But today she calls herself a sickle cell warrior, and she shares her intriguing journey and challenges us to win life's battles no matter what we face. So please welcome with me, Toyin.
Thank you very much, Koko. Thanks for having me.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's been how long since, we've been friends for
20 plus years. I think it's even I don't want to say
I
how
think it's
old
like 30 years.
Yeah, I think it's 30 years.
Then they'll now know how old we are.
Exactly.
So Toyin, tell us what sickle cell is.
Okay, basically, to make it as simple as possible, sickle cell is a condition of the red blood cells, where typically the average person's red blood cells is round and firm. Ours is like a banana shape, sickle, that's where it comes from, and very hard. So when it's going up and down the blood vessels, it tends to get stuck, resulting in lack of oxygen. And that's where you get all these complications. Typically, one of them is a vascular crisis. That's it. So we basically get it from our parents.
Yes, I was going to ask. It's
yes,
hereditary.
It's hereditary.
Okay.
Not contagious.
Okay. Important to point out.
Yes. So basically, the typical one everybody goes with is the AS genotype. Where
that's a blood type.
Yes,
right?
that's
okay.
your genotype.
Okay.
That's what is different from your blood group.
Okay.
A lot of people mix blood group and genotype, but genotype is totally different. So
blood group is the B plus.
Yeah, B plus, B negative, A plus, A negative, O.
Yes.
Yeah, and all
okay.
that. So the genotype is typically what is found in Nigeria is AA, AS, CC, SC, and SS. That's typically what is found here in Nigeria.
In terms of genotype?
Genotype, yes.
Okay, so a child is born with sickle cell normally when both parents have the AS blood genotype?
Yes, typically.
Okay. Typically.
But you also have, like I said, there's a genotype that a lot of people know called the CC. Now, if you are your CC or AC, and you marry somebody with AS, you're likely to have a child with sickle cell, resulting in the genotype SC. So with sickle cell, there are typically two types of genotype, SC and SS, typically in Nigeria. But there is also something called beta thalassemia, which people don't know. And a person with AA genotype can have something called beta thalassemia, and you might marry somebody with AS thinking you are safe, but beta thalassemia is also a form of sickle cell.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Interesting. I remember when I was in secondary school, we had a young girl, with us that had sickle cell, and she couldn't participate in a lot of things.
Yeah.
She was always sick and having to go home from school, and it affected her studies. And that's a bit of how your story is in your book, Still Standing.
Yes.
So you talk about a childhood of loneliness, isolation, even suicidal thoughts.
Yes, yes. Growing up, like you said, the hospital was like practically my second home. And you always go in there, people are jabbing you, looking for your vein. And then I had what you call sickle cell complications, leg ulcer, a vascular necrosis of the hip, which is why I got my physical disability, and so many other things. So it limited me from being part of the typical society growing up. And it created a loneliness in me. And then when you're called to go to the hospital repeatedly, you wonder why God is doing this to you, and all that. So it was pretty challenging trying to maintain that typical childhood. You go to school, even my schooling was disrupted, so it was pretty hard.
So in your book, you describe the pain of sickle cell, which is called a crisis, as worse than labor pain and worse than an extreme toothache, which I understand is really terrible. Labor pain, I know about, so I can imagine anything worse than that. I don't even, what.
I always say that, just imagine that you slammed your finger on your car door.
Yes, you also mentioned that.
And it's 10 times worse.
That really says a lot. You say on there's a page in your book with a sentence. Let me see if I can find it. Page 109. You say, on the 14th of March, 1991, my life changed forever. What happened?
That was when I was taken to the hospital. I was ill, and they first took me to the Unilag Health Center, which is where I grew up. But when things got worse, that took us to Luth, and I spent about 3 weeks there. And I was lying in bed, trying to avoid bed sores or bed ulcers. And I was telling the nurse that, look, I'm uncomfortable. I've been in this position, and I feel there's a tendency to have this bed sores, and I wanted to turn, but there was nobody to turn me, so I decided to just move slightly my position where I had a snap. And in fact, in the daytime, the nurse was like, oh, don't worry, something not that bad, just take Panadol. So I was in pain till my father turned up in the evening on one of his visiting thing, and I told him, this is what I'm facing. I don't know what's going on. They now rushed me to the diagnostic center, took an X-ray, and found out that my hip was dislocated, removed from the sockets, and so they had to now patch me up, put me in a cast, the POP, like a trousers, and I was there for 6 months. And at that point, I was thinking, okay, how worse could this get? Because yes, I had sickle cell, but at least I could play, do some stuff. But after that, I now had to start using crutches, and with the society we live in up to today, disability friendliness is not a high point. So it was challenging living that life from then on.
Okay. At some point, you met the Lord Jesus Christ.
Yes.
You gave your life to Christ.
Yes.
Now, what has the difference been in your life? Who was Toyin being a born-again Christian and after?
Toyin was a lost person, someone who felt that life had ended, that nothing could come out of where she was. But since I gave my life to Christ, I found purpose.
Okay.
God's will is very important to me. In our journey, we tend to focus on other things, but I've come to understand, once you understand God's will for you, regardless of your circumstances, no matter what is thrown at you, your focus is on that purpose.
That purpose of God. We're going to take a break now. When we come back, we'll then talk about the purpose of God for your life. So thank you for staying with us here, where I'm in conversation with Toyin Adesola. Please stay with us. I'm reading from the Colors of Life devotional. The topic is from generation to generation, and the scripture is Joel chapter 1, verse 15. Tell your children of it, and let your children tell their children, and their children another generation. God instructed the Israelites to pass on the memory of their experiences with Him unto their children. who would in turn pass it on to their own children, and so on. Now, this instruction is also for you and me. But we must not only tell our children of God's goodness, we need to also let them know of His impending judgment on those who insist on going their own way. One of the ways we can deliberately share our knowledge of God with our children is by having a daily prayer as a family. That way, we pass on our faith from generation to generation. It's important that we make time out daily to commune with God. From my experience, I would say first thing in the morning is the best time to do so. Now, in this time of fellowship, we can praise God, thank Him, pray to Him, and also make time to listen to Him. One of the most common ways God speaks is through His Word, the Scriptures, and that's where the use of a devotional is so important. God has a word just for you. Get your copy of the Colors of Life devotional today. My guest, Toyin Adesola, was born with sickle cell, but at a point in her life, she met the Lord Jesus Christ, and she says after that meeting, she began to live a purposeful life. So in this second section of my conversation with her, she'll tell us just how she's doing that. Toyin, you're a trauma-informed care coach, and also you're into mixed media.
Yes.
So tell us about the artistic part of Toyin.
Okay, I found the artistic, I never really thought I was artistic, but that part of me came out during COVID.
Okay, wow.
Yes. Because of COVID, I was banned from going anywhere, and I mean anywhere. So I was isolated in my home. In fact, visitors were not allowed to really come and see me unless they are sure of who is coming. So for 11 good months, I stayed at home in that position. So I had a friend who I met who is helping people with sickle cell as well through arts. And he was like, why don't you take a pen and just paint? Don't get involved in thinking how or why or anything, just paint. And that's how I started, bit by bit. I started looking at YouTube videos, learning about art, what to use, and I fell in love with it. Now, I do abstracts because abstract doesn't define a particular structure.
Okay.
You can, it expresses you in feelings, and it has a healing, art has a healing component when you're going through stuff, yeah.
Excellent. I know you're also the Executive Director of Sickle Cell Advocacy and Management Initiative, SAMI. So how do you achieve the objectives of SAMI?
Okay. Our focus is to help people with sickle cell and their families to live healthy, productive lives. So what we do is that we run several projects focusing on the management, where we found out that a lot of people, because of lack of money, don't go to the hospital. So we started a free clinic, monthly free clinic, to reduce the effect of when people fall into crisis and to keep them informed. Okay, you go to this hospital. Sometimes we support in medical bills, not so much because funding is a challenge, but the clinic, Extra Care Clinic, has been our flagship. And then we've also looked at their productivity, how to empower them, because it's not every job that they can do. And sometimes there's, let's face it, there's stigmatization in employment. So we also try and empower them to run businesses. We helped quite a number of them during that COVID session.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in the preface of this book, Still Standing, Pastor Mazzino says, life is 10% what is thrown at you and 90% how you respond. Exactly. And I really think I see that in your life, in this book, Still Standing, because as a child, you could have been exempted from many things, like when there was like punishment for the class, for being naughty, but you chose to serve that
punishment
like anyone else, you know. And it looks to me like your parents encouraged you to respond in a healthy way? Because your father was Vice Chancellor, University of Lagos.
Yes.
So you come from a privileged background, and you tried to get into University of Lagos, but you didn't score enough points, not because you're not smart, but because of the disruption to your education.
Yeah.
But when I read it, I thought, but your father could have, you know, they could have made an exception for you, but he
was
didn't.
a very principled person, and in his own, let's choose the next best thing, and that was Lagos State University. Then they were just starting and growing, and he had a friend there, and he was like, okay, let's do that, because my father was somebody who would have, you know, people come, oh, I want my child to be this, and but he refused. And for him, he would also do that to his own daughter. So yeah, it was interesting.
Yes, so you took that attitude of how I respond is important, that positive. And how has your Christian faith helped you? Because I ask myself, as a Christian, in your story, you also tell of going out to be prayed for, to be healed, not once, not twice, and even putting down your crutches. But you're still living with the disability.
Yeah.
So, you know, how do you cope with that as a Christian? Because I'm sure you believe in miracles.
Yes,
and you believe that
definitely.
Jesus heals.
Yeah.
Yet he hasn't healed you.
Yeah. Well, one thing I've learned growing up is that God allows certain things to happen for a purpose. Now, probably if I was healed and all that, will I be helping over 600 people living with sickle cell? Likely not. I'll be living my whole life. And I keep saying this thing, God has not brought you here into this world for yourself. He brought you here for others. The same way Christ died for others, you know, is the same way we should take whatever challenges that come our way and remember, what is that purpose? What is that thing that God has brought me here for? And once you can identify with that, your faith with Christ grows, because you know that, okay, God has given me this, should I call it an assignment?
Okay. Let me ask you, how's your work funded?
Ooh.
The work of SAMI.
Yeah, the work for SAMI. Mostly crowdfunding.
Okay.
Sometimes companies, but I've realized that for companies, when they see health is not a sustainable model, healthcare.
Okay.
So a lot of companies shy away from funding that area, but it's been a work of faith. There are times that we owed rent, and I expected money from certain people. The money didn't come, and then out of the blue, somebody I didn't think about showed up, give me a call, and I'm like, what? You know, so in working this work, I've realized that it's a work of faith. Once you understand why you're doing what you're doing, there are times I've thought of giving up, sure. But I always remember that when you get that call from that person facing through a challenge, and you minister hope to that person,
then it's all worth the
That is worth
experience,
it.
isn't it? And your story is dotted with what I would call God incidences. And one I remember reading in this book where you needed a blood transfusion,
yes.
and you were in the hospital and there was no blood, and you prayed.
Yes.
And your cousin came seemingly out of the blues. And
Exactly. He just came to visit me, and, oh, what's up? You know, how do you are in the hospital? And I said, well, they said I need blood. I don't have blood. Oh, okay. Where do I donate? And he went down to donate, and that was it. And there have been many, many, many circumstances. I call myself a walking miracle, because I know for sure, if not for God, I wouldn't be alive today there.
I can imagine. And talking about funding for your book, I just want to say to our audience that part of the way you raise funds for your for the work is by selling this book. So I would really encourage people still standing, and the misadventures of Oga and Madam AS. They're available in local bookshops in Nigeria, but also on Amazon. That's so important. Toyin, I have a question for you. Your parents were AS. You know, they got married, and you've lived the experience of the result of that. Now, if a couple come to you today, the man is AS, The woman is AS, they love each other, and above all, they are Christians, so they believe in miracles. What would be your advice to them?
Well, I'll first of all tell them to look at it in 3 ways. Now, having a child with sickle cell has a lot of responsibilities, both emotionally and financially. So I always advise, they should review between themselves their financial capacity, their emotional capacity, and the support system they have from family. Because these 3 are very key. If your financial capacity cannot manage a child with sickle cell, you will learn to hate that child. And I'm not kidding. I've seen situations where children are neglected, and when I mean neglected, because the parents couldn't cope or handle that. So I would say financially, then emotionally, your spouse, check each other. Can you cope? Can you emotionally and mentally having a child who has a chronic illness that you likely have hospital stay, likely have different complications? So can you cope? And then your support system, how is the family in relation to that?
That is also important. These are the practicalities.
Yes. So
of
we
a
don't
situation like that.
tell them outright don't.
Yes.
We give them the opportunity to make a choice.
And an informed decision.
An informed decision.
We're going to take a break now and come back and round off. So this is in conversation with Toyin Adesola, encouraging us that when we come to Christ, we can live a purposeful life, and whatever challenges we face is not just about us, but how we can help others as well. So stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. We are now in the concluding part of this conversation with Toyin Adesola. Toyin, you tell me till today you still pray for divine healing. And yet the reality is that you're still living with the effects of sickle cell. How does that make you feel?
Sometimes I question God, I question my faith. And maybe, that thing of maybe I'm not praying hard enough. Maybe I'm not trusting God enough.
We all go
maybe
through
your
that.
faith is not enough. But I've learned that life is a journey and we have to trust God in the process. I use Paul as an example. Paul was someone who always talked about his challenges, his weakness. And there's one particular part, he said, count it all joy. And when you look at that word, how can you count your joy when you have challenges? God then now expects, you're going to go through these challenges, but you should be, should I want to say, rejoice in it. Find meaning, find healing. And that was one of them. He says his strength is made perfect in my weaknesses. So, at that moment of when you are down, when you have pain, you're vulnerable. And that's where you now call on the strength of God to help you, carry you through this process.
And that strength is so obvious in your life. Is that why you're called the resilience boss?
Yes. Like my father used to call me, my artist name, Okurimeta, meaning 3 men in one.
Really?
Yes.
My goodness. Because you've run a cake business.
Yes. I've run the 10K marathon with my wheelchair, yes.
And you won a UNESCO Runaway Jazz Humanitarian Award.
Yes.
What's that about?
It's basically an event that was carried out every year to celebrate fashion and other things. And they wanted to honor people who had been impacting people's life. And I was one of the recipients, humanitarian of the award. So, yeah.
And
so
very well deserved, because I follow you on Instagram and I'm like, how does she do this? Now let's go to your other book, The Misadventures of Oga and Madam A.S. Oga is like Mr., the head, of the home. So, and the subtitle, When Your Gene Defines Who You Marry. So just tell us what this book is about.
Basically, it's an educational journey
Okay.
into a family's life in what happens when they have a child with sickle cell. There's a Cat 22 at the end, which I won't do. Spoiler alert.
Exactly. So they can buy the
The
books.
But I wanted to educate people about sickle cell, but I didn't want it to be the typical, what is sickle cell? How do you get sickle cell? So I weaved a story based on, funny enough, experiences of what I see parents with sickle cell go through.
Yes.
And decided to do that. Yeah.
And how much of your story is here? Because people say, even when a writer writes a work of fiction, that their lives are in the characters in the book.
Not so much, except in the part of the teacher,
Okay.
which was someone else in my life. I grew to appreciate her faith in God. She was somebody, she didn't have much, but there was this joy that she exuded when she was always doing stuff for people. And up to the time when she passed on, she impacted, I didn't even realize that at funeral, everybody came up with testimonies. So she was a what I call a model.
A role model.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, Toyin, yours may be sickle cell. Mine is in several other areas, but everyone has a challenge in life. So just give us a parting advice to our viewers, you know, about living with adversity. What would you say to encourage them?
Okay, I would say that every adversity has a purpose. You may not look at it that way, but God gives us those adversities to strengthen us, strengthen our faith, and able to use those experiences, those stories that we've gone through to inspire others that are hanging on thread to make their lives better.
And that really gives real meaning to life, I would say,
Yes.
when it's no longer about us, but about others.
Yes.
Toyin, thank you so
Thank you so much for having me.
It's been wonderful having you. I've been encouraged and inspired. Well done on all that you do.
Thank you so much.
So we've come to the end of our conversation with Toyin Adesola. Remember to like us, follow us on social media, share this video. This is the Colors of Life show where we seek to know Christ and to make him known.